Part 1: The Wolf Women of Cane Creek. They would come to be known by many names. Whispered labels passed from porch to porch, from church steps to country stores. Wolf Women. The Cursed Sisters. The Daughters of the Hollow. But long before legend hardened them into creatures of myth, they were simply women, born into isolation, shaped by bloodlines that folded inward on themselves, and abandoned by a world that found it easier to fear than to understand. This is the forgotten history of the Blackwood sisters of the Ozark Hills. A buried chapter of American rural life where geography, silence, and forbidden family unions fused into something so disturbing that truth itself dissolved into folklore. Deep in southern Missouri, where the Ozarks rise in uneven folds of timber and stone, lies Cane Creek Hollow. The land there seems to swallow sound. Fog lingers long after dawn. Sunlight filters weakly through dense canopies of oak and pine, leaving the forest floor in a permanent half-shadow. Even in daylight, the place feels withdrawn from time. It was here, hidden among those valleys, that a family retreated from the modern world, generation by generation, until they vanished almost entirely. And it was here, in the autumn of 1937, that a young physician named Thomas Harrington encountered something that would follow him for the rest of his life. Harrington had been sent into the hills on a routine public health survey. Rural communities across Missouri were being evaluated for tuberculosis, malnutrition, and sanitation concerns. His assignment was unremarkable on paper. A few isolated homesteads. Sparse population. Minimal medical contact. But on October 17, 1937, Harrington recorded an entry in his field journal that departed sharply from clinical routine. "I have found something I cannot fully explain," he wrote. 3 sisters living in complete isolation. Their physical abnormalities are extreme, unlike anything I have seen or studied. The locals refer to them as wolf women. What Harrington discovered was a crude, 2-room cabin tucked deep within the hollow, nearly invisible beneath years of encroaching forest. The structure leaned unevenly, its boards darkened by moisture and age. Windows were boarded from the inside. The air carried a smell of damp wood, animal fat, and neglect. Inside lived the Blackwood family. Jeremiah Blackwood and his wife Sarah, first cousins by blood, had raised their children there, far from schools, churches, or doctors. The family's withdrawal from surrounding communities had been gradual, almost imperceptible at first. Over decades, contact thinned. Visits stopped. Questions went unanswered. By the time Harrington arrived, only 4 people remained in the cabin. Jeremiah and his 3 daughters, Eliza, Mary, and Ruth. Their ages ranged from late teens to late 20s. Their conditions, Harrington noted, defied simple explanation. The sisters could not read. They could not write. Their speech consisted of broken sounds and improvised phrases, comprehensible only to one another and, occasionally, their father. Their movements were irregular, awkward, strained, almost animal in rhythm. Local stories had already begun to circulate. People spoke of women who moved through the woods at night. Of shapes glimpsed between trees. Of sounds drifting through fog, high-pitched cries that didn't belong to any known animal. Fear filled the gaps where knowledge should have lived. Harrington focused first on the eldest sister, Eliza. Her facial structure was dramatically asymmetrical. The lower jaw extended far beyond the upper, giving her face a sloped, distorted appearance. Coarse hair grew across her cheeks, jawline, and neck in uneven patches. Her eyes sat at slightly different heights, lending her gaze a disorienting quality. Her hands were worse. Several fingers were shortened. Others fused together, bones merged into malformed clusters. Simple tasks required visible effort. She held her arms close to her body, shoulders rounded inward, as though attempting to protect herself from being seen. Mary, the middle sister, shared many of the same traits. But her spine curved sharply, forcing her into a permanent hunch. She moved slowly, each step deliberate, compensating for a body that refused to support itself properly. Ruth, the youngest, was different. Her facial structure appeared closer to what might be considered typical, but her legs were severely underdeveloped. She moved by dragging herself forward, arms bearing the weight of her body. Over time, her upper limbs had grown unusually muscular, shaped by necessity rather than design. Cognitively, Ruth fluctuated. At times she seemed absent, unresponsive. At other moments, she spoke clearly, brief sentences that revealed flashes of understanding, awareness, and something deeper. Recognition. What disturbed Harrington most was not the deformities alone. It was the sisters' expressions. Fear, yes. Confusion, certainly. But also shame. As if they sensed that something about them had gone terribly wrong. The Blackwoods had lived in the Ozarks since before the Civil War. Records indicated the family's arrival in the region dated back to the late 1860s. Over time, they moved further inward, away from towns, away from neighbors, away from oversight. Interviews with nearby families revealed a pattern. Cousins marrying cousins. Then closer unions. Then silence. By the 1920s, isolation had become absolute. A local merchant named William Cooper recalled Jeremiah Blackwood's rare visits. He'd come maybe once or twice a year, Cooper told Harrington. Always paid with pelts or handmade goods. Never talked much. Never brought the girls. Folks were warned to stay away from Cane Creek after dark. When asked why, Cooper hesitated. Strange sounds, he said. Not animal. Not human either. Those sounds, combined with the sisters' unusual appearance, became raw material for folklore. People said the women hunted at night. That they moved like wolves through the trees. That the hollow itself was cursed. What no one said aloud was simpler, and far more disturbing. They were witnessing the consequences of multi-generational inbreeding. Harrington pieced together the family's history through scattered accounts. Jeremiah Blackwood had married his first cousin in 1908. His parents had been closely related as well. Earlier generations had intermarried repeatedly, compressing the family tree inward until genetic variation nearly vanished. The result was catastrophic. The sisters were not monsters. They were the physical record of isolation made flesh. Yet in the absence of education and medical understanding, the community transformed tragedy into legend. It was easier to speak of curses than chromosomes. Easier to imagine wolves than confront neglect. When Harrington left Cane Creek that evening, fog had already begun to settle. The forest closed behind him, swallowing the path as though it had never existed. He knew then that what he had found would not remain hidden. And that once exposed, the truth would be far more unsettling than the myths it would replace. Part 2: Bloodlines and Silence. To understand how the Blackwood sisters came to exist, one must travel backward, past the fog-choked hollow, past the boarded windows and animal traps, into the years after the Civil War, when the Ozarks became a refuge for men who wanted to disappear. In 1867, a former Confederate soldier named Jacob Blackwood arrived in Carter County with little more than a rifle, a mule, and a past he did not intend to discuss. County land records place his homestead deep within what was then uncharted territory, ridgeland no surveyor bothered to map in detail. Isolation, in this case, was not accidental. It was chosen. In later interviews conducted by a regional historical society, elderly residents recalled the Blackwoods as a family that never quite joined the world around them. They attended church sporadically. Children were rarely seen. Questions were met with silence. Henry Stilwell, interviewed in 1952 at the age of 91, remembered the stories passed down by his grandfather. Jacob came here running, Stilwell said. From what, nobody knew. Back then, a man's past was his own business. The hills were full of people like that. Jacob's first wife died in childbirth 2 years after their arrival, leaving him with an infant son and no nearby kin. Within a year, he married his deceased wife's sister, an arrangement considered socially acceptable in the era, especially in frontier regions where survival outweighed propriety. That marriage, while not consanguineous by strict definition, established a precedent. Blood stayed close. family remained inward-facing. By the late 19th century, the second generation of Blackwoods had grown up almost entirely removed from external influence. Church logs from traveling Methodist ministers show the family's attendance dropped to twice a year, then once, then not at all. Education never followed. Children learned only what their parents knew, and what they believed. Jeremiah Blackwood was born in 1888, Jacob's grandson, inheriting not just the land but the worldview shaped by decades of separation. In 1908, county records confirm that Jeremiah married his first cousin, Sarah Blackwood. No one objected. In isolated rural communities, such unions were not unheard of. But what distinguished the Blackwoods was repetition. Cousin followed cousin. Generation followed generation. Local physician Raymond Wells documented early concerns in 1912, noting abnormal facial development in the Blackwoods' first child, a son who died before reaching his 4th birthday. The entry was brief. No follow-up occurred. By the time the Great War ended, neighbors began to notice changes. They turned strange, recalled Mabel Thornton, whose family ran a general store 10 miles from Cane Creek. Jeremiah would come down less and less. Always alone. Wouldn't meet your eye. Paid with pelts instead of cash. After 1929, he stopped coming entirely. Court documents later revealed what happened next. After Sarah gave birth to 3 daughters, Eliza, Mary, and Ruth, Jeremiah sealed off the family from the outside world completely. Windows were boarded shut. The cabin was surrounded with animal traps. Paths were intentionally obscured. The Blackwoods lived only on what they could grow, hunt, or scavenge. More disturbing than the physical isolation were the writings Jeremiah left behind. When authorities eventually searched the cabin, they found journals filled with cramped handwriting, pages outlining a belief system that fused distorted religious ideas with deeply flawed interpretations of heredity. Jeremiah believed his family represented a purification. He wrote that outside blood had weakened earlier generations. That the deformities visible in his daughters were not defects, but revelations, proof that the bloodline was returning to its original form. This belief hardened into doctrine. Isolation, misinformation, and unchecked delusion formed a closed circuit. With no external challenge, Jeremiah's worldview intensified over time, transforming neglect into conviction and abuse into divine duty. The winter of 1934 deepened the family's disappearance. Weather records confirm one of the harshest seasons the Ozarks had experienced in decades. Snow fell relentlessly. Roads vanished. Entire hollows were cut off for weeks at a time. For the Blackwoods, already isolated, that winter erased what little connection remained. According to Jeremiah's journals, Sarah Blackwood died during those months. No doctor was called. No burial record exists. Her death left the 3 sisters entirely under their father's control. By the time spring arrived, Cane Creek Hollow had become a sealed world. 3 women. 1 man. No witnesses. When Dr. Harrington encountered the sisters in 1937, the situation had deteriorated beyond recovery. Still, when he returned to Springfield with photographs and field notes, his findings were met with disbelief. Medical colleagues questioned the authenticity of the images, taken with Harrington's Kodak Brownie camera. The deformities appeared exaggerated. Almost staged. Dr. William Foster, head of the Missouri State Medical Association, initially dismissed the report as misinterpretation or rural exaggeration. That changed with the second expedition. On November 23, 1937, Harrington returned to Cane Creek Hollow accompanied by Dr. Foster and 2 deputies from the Carter County Sheriff's Office. Snow dusted the ground. Temperatures hovered below freezing. The trail was barely visible. What they found confirmed everything Harrington had reported, and more. Dr. Foster's subsequent report was blunt. The sisters present a constellation of congenital abnormalities consistent only with extreme multigenerational consanguinity. The probability of these conditions occurring randomly is effectively non-existent. Eliza's jaw extended nearly 2 inches beyond her upper dentition. Excessive hair growth covered almost half her face and neck, creating the unmistakable appearance that had fueled rumors. X-rays revealed an additional partial row of teeth, hypodontia, hidden behind her primary set. Her fingers showed syndactyly, bones fused in patterns seen almost exclusively in severe genetic disorders. Spinal imaging revealed advanced scoliosis. Mary exhibited enlarged hands, feet, and facial features resembling acromegaly, though tests ruled out pituitary involvement. Her spine had curved so severely that she stood nearly 8 inches shorter than her skeletal height would suggest. Her intellectual capacity was estimated to be that of a young child. Ruth's lower limbs were profoundly underdeveloped. She moved by pulling herself forward with her arms, which had thickened over time. Yet despite these limitations, she occasionally spoke with clarity, responding to questions in ways that suggested awareness and memory. Later, Dr. Foster would write that the most unsettling aspect was not medical. It was emotional. The sisters' faces carried an unmistakable awareness of difference. A quiet recognition that something about them had gone wrong, paired with no understanding of why. That awareness, trapped inside bodies shaped by neglect and biology, lingered long after the physicians left. When news spread through the region, the reaction was not relief. It was fear. Locals did not speak of genetic disorders. They spoke of confirmation. Proof that the stories were true. That the wolf women were real. Reverend Thaddeus Burke had written years earlier of the community's resistance to compassion. Fear, he noted, has overwhelmed charity. Folklore scholar Vance Randolph would later collect multiple versions of the Cane Creek legend, each describing female figures with animal features who howled at night and moved through the forest like predators. The truth had already been mythologized. And once that transformation occurred, it could not be reversed. Part 3, After the Howling. By the time state authorities finally acted, the story of the wolf women had already escaped the hollow. For nearly a decade before Dr. Harrington's visit, rumors had circulated through the Ozarks, passing from logging camps to church halls, from hunters to school children. Some versions spoke of women who changed beneath moonlight. Others insisted they had always been wolves, wearing human skin by day. Each retelling pushed the truth further away. The earliest surviving reference appeared in a 1931 letter written by Reverend Thaddeus Burke to a colleague in St. Louis. Burke described parishioners who refused to travel near Cane Creek after dark, convinced something unholy lived there. "They say the women cry like animals," Burke wrote. "I fear these are simply unfortunate souls with deformities, but fear has closed hearts that charity might have opened." By the time folklorist Vance Randolph documented the legend in the mid-1930s, it had already fractured into multiple variations. Yet certain elements remained unchanged: female figures, permanent transformation, corrupted bloodlines. Unlike European werewolf myths, which often focused on men cursed temporarily, the Cane Creek stories described women who were irrevocably altered. Their condition was framed not as punishment, but inheritance. Bad blood. A supernatural translation of a very real genetic catastrophe. Geography helped the legend thrive. The Ozarks are a place where sound behaves unpredictably. Fog bends noise. Hollows amplify distant cries while swallowing nearby ones. A scream can travel miles, distorted into something unrecognizable. Medical records noted that the Blackwood sisters produced high-pitched, arrhythmic vocalizations due to malformed vocal tracts. When those sounds drifted through fog and timber, listeners filled in the rest. Samuel Tucker, a local hunting guide, recalled an encounter in 1935. "I heard something wailing," he said. "Not animal. Not human neither. Saw shapes moving low through the trees. Didn't wait to see more." What Tucker likely witnessed were the sisters gathering food, moving as their bodies allowed, partially obscured by mist. But the mind, primed by fear, saw something else entirely. When the sisters were removed from Cane Creek Hollow in December of 1937, the legend did not die. It strengthened. Snow fell heavily that day, covering the dirt road as a county medical wagon descended from the mountains. Eliza, Mary, and Ruth were wrapped in surplus army blankets, trembling, not from cold alone, but from disorientation. They had never seen a town. Never ridden in a vehicle. Never been more than a few miles from the cabin. Social worker Margaret Holloway documented the removal as deeply traumatic. The sisters resisted separation from one another, communicating through sounds and gestures only they understood, a private language forged in isolation. Jeremiah Blackwood was arrested without resistance. He offered no apology. No remorse. Court transcripts show he maintained his belief until the end, that he had protected something sacred. Psychiatric evaluations later diagnosed him with a delusional disorder centered on religious fixation, enabled and intensified by decades of isolation. He died in a state psychiatric facility in 1943, never recanting. The sisters' fate proved no kinder. They were initially housed together at the state hospital in Farmington. Despite official policy, word spread quickly. Staff brought visitors. Doctors observed. Students stared. The wolf women had followed them. It was Dr. Harrington who intervened once more, filing a formal complaint in early 1938. "These are not curiosities," he wrote. "They are human beings suffering from preventable conditions." The state responded by separating the sisters, believing specialized care would improve outcomes. Instead, it severed their final connection to one another. Medical records show rapid decline. Ruth was transferred to Northwest Missouri State Hospital. She died of pneumonia in 1939, at 21 years old. Mary lived until 1944, institutionalized in Marshall, Missouri. Attendants noted she often vocalized sounds believed to be her sisters' names. Eliza survived the longest. She remained withdrawn, frequently refusing food, never fully adapting to institutional life. She died in 1952. None of the sisters ever returned to the Ozarks. The cabin itself burned in a forest fire that same year, erasing the last physical trace of their existence. Cane Creek Hollow remains sparsely inhabited to this day. Hikers occasionally find stone foundations and rusted tools swallowed by undergrowth. Locals still avoid the area after dark. The case, however, did not vanish. Public health officials cited the Blackwood sisters as a catalyst for reform. In 1940, Missouri introduced the Blackwood Protocols, guidelines for monitoring isolated rural communities, emphasizing education, outreach, and early intervention rather than punishment. The tragic irony, noted one administrator, was that such measures could have prevented everything. Geneticists would later revisit the case. A 1987 study at Washington University used surviving records to examine how recessive mutations compound across generations. The Blackwood sisters became a grim data point, a biological warning written in flesh. Yet their cultural legacy followed a different path. By the 1950s, the wolf women appeared in tourist pamphlets and ghost story collections. Names were changed. Dates blurred. The truth softened into entertainment. Historian Mildred Jenkins reflected on this transformation decades later. People needed monsters, she said. If they were cursed creatures, then nobody failed them. But if they were just girls, well, that's harder to live with. That may be the most unsettling truth of all. The real horror of Cane Creek Hollow was not transformation under moonlight. It was the slow, quiet failure of compassion. A community that chose fear over responsibility. Silence over intervention. In turning victims into legends, accountability dissolved. And so the story endures, not as a warning about monsters, but about neglect. About what happens when society's concern ends where paved roads do. The Blackwood sisters were not wolf women. They were human beings. And remembering them as such may be the only way their suffering means something at all.